Okay, this is the process I used for modeling, rigging, and texturing my character. So firstly, I start with a cube with a bunch of subdivisions, and then I turn on a mirror modifier and go into sculpt mode and start sculpting it into the shape of a head. I then go into edit mode and create the nose. I then create a cylinder and extrude it in edit mode, again to create the arms and torso using my reference image that I drew up as a guide. I then do the same thing for the legs using a mirror modifier and extruding. I then join the vertices of these different objects and combine them into one object. I select the faces of the head and I create a copy of them and size it up to create the hair, then extruding on cylinders to create like hair strands, and then once again using a subdivided cube to create the rest of her hair. Okay, moving on to UV mapping. Firstly, I assign this UV map texture I found so I can quickly lay it out, and then using Blender's automatic UV smart UV unwrap tool, I position the faces myself, aligning them in a way that makes it obvious with things that will be the same color being in the same column. I then go into texture paint mode and start testing to see if my UV map is correct and works, and then I just block out the correct colors. I face a problem there where I'm using the wrong color rendering mode, so I quickly switch that over, and then I block out the rest of her colors. I then switch from the fill tool to the brush tool and draw in the details of her texture, including shadows and stripes and just a bunch of details. I would also like to note that all this footage is sped up by at least 10,000%, so even if it looks somewhat simple here, it has taken me a very, very long time. Okay, moving on to rigging. I first test out Blender's Rigify add-on, but I find that it doesn't work for me, so I follow an online tutorial on how to rig something yourself completely independently, and I create individual bones and parent them to each other. And then that works, but I've got the bones, but I can't get the actual rig, so I have to go back into Rigify and copy my bone settings, apply them to the Rigify model, and then use the Rigify model to create my actual character rig that I can use for animation. Because you can't really animate that well just with the bones. Having having the actual character rig makes it a lot easier. I also face some problems of her model not correctly being parented to the bones, so when I move the bones and the rig, she doesn't actually move with them, like particularly parts of her hair, and that was because of vertex issues, so I just had to join the vertexes together again. As you can see, I finally have my rig working, and I'm just testing out animation and how I can move her around, and then I find some issues where she's missing some shading in particular places, so I go in and touch that up. And then moving on to the face, firstly I make the face UV map bigger so it's higher quality. I then move into Photoshop and use the faces as an outline on how big it can be, and then I just draw over my sketch from before, and then just using Photoshop, I just draw in a face, position it as good as I can. and then I just copy paste the face down and then make it a closed eye, and then I do a bunch of different expressions that I'm going to need in my animation. Moving into geometry nodes, I make it so I parent them to a bone, so when I move the bone, it changes her face texture. Okay, moving on to how I use coding to solve a broken Blender add-on, that is the Rukeka add-on. So I use ChatGPT to help me with this, and I prompted it by asking what's wrong with this code with the error message, and then reading its response and implementing it into the code. However, this didn't fully end up working. Okay, moving on, I'm making my water through geometry nodes, using a bunch of different modifiers